I'm joined today on the podcast by my good friend, Chris Finn. Chris is a transformational coach and psychologist from Dorset, just down the road from me. We met at a personal development event and instantly hit it off. Chris was a senior lecturer in psychology and taught both mindfulness and CBT before moving into coaching. He's worked with some of the best coaches in the world, including Michael Neal, and he understands how people work at the deepest level. And every time we speak, I learn something new. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation and share it with you today. Thank you for joining me, Chris.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, mate.
Likewise. So let's dive in and talk about how you moved from psychology and areas of mindfulness into coaching and transformational coaching. Tell me a little bit about how that happened and what that looked like.
Yeah, thinking back to it, it's funny because I remember being in the world of psychology, we used to poo-poo life coaches. I remember being a fully trained psychologist, and I was like, well, what do these life coaches actually do? You know, do they just motivate people? I'd watched a bit of Tony Robbins, and I thought it was mainly coaches were just about motivation. So it wasn't something that appealed to me. But later on, I was getting really kind of, I don't know, dissuaded by the world of psychology. I got into psychology because I wanted to understand how human beings work. And psychology answered some of those questions, right? But it didn't answer all of the questions. Like, we used to teach a lot of tools and techniques, and some of them were helpful some of the time, but a lot of the time they just didn't work. And I was like, well, why don't they work? Why does this thing work for some people and why does it not work for others? Like, what are we missing? And at the same time that I was finding that psychology didn't answer all the questions that I had, I bumped into a transformational coach. And I was like, what is it that you do? And we had a chat, and I ended up paying for a coaching session. And that one session impacted me much more than any of the psychology I'd learned. And I'd trained for 7 years formally at university level. And we'd had an hour, 90 minutes, wherever it was together. And it impacted me more than anything I'd learned. And I was like, what is this? And so she recommended a book. It was by Michael Neal, Super Coach. Highly recommend it. And I was like, wow, this guy runs a coaching training school. So I didn't even look at the cost. I just knew that I had to have some of what he had. And I signed up and I trained with him, and I worked with him. And I now do that. I do transformative coaching. And we can obviously get into what that is, but I've found that it really is the difference that makes a difference. It's the thing that works far more than any of the science of psychology that I personally learn. I love it. It transforms people's lives in sometimes not a very long space of time, which you know.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, right? Change can
Yeah.
happen very quickly. You don't have to follow the set protocol of how long change should happen, but instead there's different possibilities there.
Yeah.
I'm super curious. What changed for you, or what transformed in that conversation that you had initially with
Mm.
that first coach?
It What I got from that conversation was I got that I was allowed to just do what I wanted to do in life, not what I thought I should do. So for me, I was always someone that thought that I had a set of rules that I lived by that I wasn't even conscious of. I didn't even know I was living by them. Well, I need to do this and I must do that and I should do that. And so I was very quite serious. Life felt like a tick box thing for me, like a to-do list. And what I got from that conversation was the window into I'm allowed to do what I want to do. I'm allowed to follow my passion, my natural energy, my heart, you might want to call it. But it was like I gave myself permission to do that. And I discovered all the reasons that I wasn't doing that. And I got so inspired, I quit my job as a senior lecturer the next month. And even though I just started training to be a coach, I'm a quick learner, and I just went full-time self-employed into coaching.
Wow, there's a big jump. What was that? What was that like for you?
It was funny because it was exciting and scary. I mean, I'm someone that's pretty good at getting in action, as you know, and I'll just jump in. If there's something to do, I'll just jump in. I'll know that I'll make it work if I want to make it work. And yeah, I mean, we just had our first kid. It was lockdown. My wife knows me, and she fully had my back, and we knew that I'd make it work. And it was a steep learning curve. I think when I first met you, I didn't know what I was doing. I was still playing around. And that was what, 2 years ago ish or something like that. And the exponential leap I've had in myself, my coaching business, and the way I coach others has grown so much in the last couple of years. I think because of the journey I've been on and my own understanding of what life is about and how we actually work at the deepest level of human beings.
So what's the difference for you when it comes from when you were working with somebody as a therapist
Mm.
versus when you're working with someone as a coach? What's different about that?
There's probably quite a few subtle differences, but the biggest one that I would articulate is it's kind of like tools and techniques versus transforming someone's reality. So I'll speak about that. So people would come to me and they would say things like, I've got anxiety, or I've got depression, or I'm stuck at work, or I'm stuck in my relationship. And what I was trained to do was give them a bunch of tools and techniques to cope with their perceived problem. But if I come to you and say, I have a problem with anxiety because life is hard, the world is scary, people are out to get me, any tools and techniques you give me can sometimes reinforce that reality. And that's what I started to see when I was working in psychology. Whereas transformational coaching for me, and there's lots of different elements to it, is about transforming someone's reality. So my understanding of this is that our reality, our own personal reality, is created by thought. So, when we say like, oh, they're just walking around in their own bubble, like, yeah, they're in their own personal reality. And we know on some level already that we look at life through lenses. Like we might say, oh, I'm wearing dark colored glasses, or I'm wearing rose tinted spectacles. Like we know on some level that we see life through a lens. And so, in a way, we are creating our own reality through the way that we're looking. And the way I see my job now as a transformational coach is I help shift someone's reality. So, one example is I was working with someone recently and they didn't even know that they were looking through the lens of life is hard. So, if you're looking through the lens of life is hard, you're going to see things that fit that perspective. I mean, in psychology, we call it confirmation bias. But I think psychology misses how far that extends into the application of real life. Like we see what we look for. It's like when you buy your new car, you end up seeing them everywhere. I mean, not yours because you've got a rare color, right? But like
Mhm.
you see them everywhere. Whereas before you didn't notice. It's not that there's more of them on the road. It's that your perception's changed. So what I do is I help someone shift their reality. And so often I'm not reinforcing someone's perspective. I'm helping them change their perspective. And that's the key for a transformative conversation for me. Help them see how they're looking, what they're thinking, and how much their perception is driving their experience of life. Because it's actually 100%, but most of us don't realize that.
So if someone's going around with the idea that life is hard and you give them a whole toolkit for them to navigate life is hard, it might improve things for them, but they're still going to be struggling and it's still going to be really difficult.
Exactly.
Versus if their reality is different, maybe life is fun or life is enjoyable or however they want to create it instead, they're going to have a completely different toolbox or they might not even need the toolbox.
Exactly, exactly. I had a really interesting one literally just this morning, first thing this morning, where this client is coming to me and they want to be more confident speaking in public. And the short version of this is after a little bit of digging, we found out they're confident speaking in front of some people, but not confident speaking in front of others. And I was curious as to what they thought the difference was, because actually there wasn't a difference. But in their mind, if those people that they're speaking to are less successful than them, then they're confident. If the people they're speaking to are more successful than them, then they're less confident. So I don't want to give them a bunch of tools and techniques to reinforce their reality, which is thought created, that they are more successful than them. Because if you change the way you're looking, the things you look at change. I think Wayne Dyer said that, right? Like we just
Hmm.
changed the way that he was looking at them. So that he wasn't looking at them as they're up here now, they're more successful than me. We had him look at them differently. And suddenly the absence of confidence was gone. And what remained was just natural confidence. So we changed his thought created reality just by changing the way he assesses his audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And what helped him to change that in the session as you're working with him? Was there a
He
question or a
he
viewpoint?
didn't
What did it look like?
yeah, he didn't even know that he was doing that. It was
Okay.
unconscious. It was a
Okay.
blind spot. He didn't even know that he was socially ranking people according to his judgment of what they were wearing, how they looked, what their job titles were. He didn't even realize he was doing that. When he saw that he was doing that and that was the cause of his anxiety, it didn't make sense for him to do that anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like if someone's looking at the world and life is hard. First off, they probably don't even know that they have that
Yeah, they think literally life is
notion.
hard. They don't realize it's a perspective.
Yeah. So they're unclear that can a very quick change can occur
Mm.
without years and years of trying and working and striving to just make it a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And what because I know we speak about this all the time, and the levels that this goes into, it never ends. It gets
Mm.
deeper and deeper. It's like mastery of anything. You know, if you're a tennis player and you don't just get great at tennis, you can. There's no end to how good you could get. And the same is true with how we experience life and how we experience reality. What's the difference for you between changing a belief, for example, versus changing someone's reality?
Oh, I love that question. So again, this points to how deep we can go. So for me, I want to look at what a belief is, and I want to look at what reality is, right? So for me, a belief is just a thought that we've had lots of times before and that we act like it's true. So like I can have a thought right now, I can have a thought about anything, and I might not be too attached to that thought. But a belief is just something that looks a little bit more real to us. Like people that believe the earth is flat, like they have a belief that the earth is flat and they think that's a truth. Okay. So for me, if I'm going to change a belief, I want to then discern what a belief is compared to what reality is. And then I also want to look at what's just true. So for me, I have a particular definition of what reality is and a particular definition of what truth is. So for me, truth is what is there before our thinking gets involved. Truth is there before thought. In that way, we start to see how we interpret truth because reality is interpretive. Einstein said that reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one, because the way I see reality is we create our own reality. If you look at something like, even if you study a tiny little bit of quantum physics, there's something called the observer perspective effect, where by observing a particular phenomenon, you change the impact of that phenomenon. So your observation isn't independent of an effect, which means that us seeing something can influence that thing that we're seeing. So for me, that points a little bit to what reality is. Reality is what we experience, and we live in a thought created reality. So what actually happens is our consciousness kicks in after our thinking, which is really interesting to me. Neuroscience shows this, that if we're going to make a decision, we're conscious of our decision after we've made it because we've already had thought by the time we're conscious of it. So in a way, if you really get that, we're always reacting to our thinking, not the thing that we think is on the outside world. So for me, reality is created by our thinking, and we all have our own personal realities. And then there's truth, right? Like truth is just what is. It's what's there before thought gets involved. Reality is us having a perspective, and then we see that perspective being reflected back to us. So if I'm changing someone's belief, I want them to see that belief might not be true. I also want them to see that maybe their reality isn't true either. It's what they're seeing. It's not a truth. It's just their reality. And I think when you get grounded in those distinctions of reality versus truth, it's much easier to change someone's reality.
Yeah, I love that explanation. And when we look at beliefs, if you just change a belief, you might solve a problem,
Mm,
but there's going to be more problems that keep persisting and keep coming
yeah.
along.
Yeah.
But if you're going to, this is really about going to the root or the source of the problem or the source of the challenge, and
Mm.
then understanding it from a completely different place.
Yeah.
Versus just changing one belief, then you're going to have more problems and more things are going to come up. But that understanding, it goes a lot deeper. I was talking with a client yesterday about judgment and non-judgment, and understanding that when we're judging things, we are judging them, and then it creates this feeling that we have, and then we react to that feeling, and it determines what we do. But
Mm.
if we're not judging it, then we're not interacting with it, and we're not reacting to it. So we've got a lot more freedom and a lot more flexibility.
That's right.
Is this a catch up game? Because if the thoughts are happening first,
Mm.
and then we're in that world, does this mean we're playing catch up all the time in what's in front of us? And is that part of understanding transformation at a deeper level?
That's funny because I hadn't thought of it like that, but it is like that. How I think about it for me personally is if I'm having an experience, let's say I'm experiencing some frustration or irritation or anxiety, then I really want to know how the psychology system works, right? So if I'm sitting here and I'm feeling anxious, what I used to do was I would try and look for the thing that was causing me anxiety. Right? It might be an email, it might be this, it might be that. Now I know that the only thing that can be causing my anxiety is my thinking. And when I know that, and when I really get what thinking is and what my relationship to it is, I don't even need to try and work out what that is. Like sometimes it would make sense to, well, what thinking is it that's making me anxious? I wouldn't even bother these days. I'd just be like, well, I'm having some anxious thoughts. Like for me, the metaphor I came up with during a client session last week, which I really liked, was it kind of works like this. Imagine that you and I live together and you come home one day and I've got the TV on and I'm sitting there watching TV and you glance at the TV and you see London and you see that Big Ben's been bombed and there's people shooting each other and you're like, what the, you look at me and you go, what the hell happened? And I'm like, what? And the TV, what's happened? And you're looking at the TV with all the war scene going on. I'm like, mate, it's a movie. And you thought it was the news. Like, we so often think that we're watching the news, that things are factual, that things just are, when actually we're just watching a movie. And the movie is our thinking that we're projecting onto our consciousness, our reality, and then we're experiencing that back. So it is like a game of catch up. For me, it's more like, well, what I'm seeing is my thinking. So if I look at someone and I'm experiencing some judgment or criticism, then that's not in them. That's just in the way I'm seeing. So that's how things are occurring to me. And then that's where my domain is. Like if there's anything I have mastery over, it's my thinking. I mean, I don't choose my thoughts because that would require that I think them before I have them. That doesn't make
Mhm.
sense, but they are my thoughts. And when I see that that's just how things are occurring to me, I don't have control because I don't, but I have some sort of ease with that. I have some sort of autonomy over that, some sort of say.
So, how important is responsibility or personal responsibility
Mm,
when it comes to owning your own reality or owning your own
mm.
thoughts?
Yeah, like this is really interesting because I think this is almost a bit paradoxical. Like, because I'm not responsible for my thoughts, but I am. Like I
Mhm.
can't control what I think. Like we know this. Like this is the famous whatever color bear it is you choose. Don't think of a purple bear. What do you think of? Purple bear. Like that one tiny little experiment shows you that you can't control your thoughts. So in a way, you're not responsible for what you think. Like I said, if I was to have control of my thoughts, it would require that I think my thoughts before I think them, which I
Mhm.
can't do. I've tried. So
Yeah.
in a way, I'm not responsible for my thoughts, but it is me creating them, and it's a part of me that I don't have control of. In a way, I'm being thought. The thoughts are just happening, and I don't have control over them. But I am responsible for my relationship to them. That's what I would say I'm responsible for. Like I am responsible for how I act, what I do, and I'm responsible to my relationship with my thoughts. And again, the kind of relationship I have with my thoughts is it's like if I get in the car and there's a radio on, some of the stuff that comes on the radio I like, some of the stuff that comes on the radio I don't like. And the stuff I don't like, I just don't take it too seriously. And that's the kind of relationship that I want with my thoughts. I'll pay interest to the ones that feel good and that lead me in a direction that's important to me. But with the ones that are like trying to take me away from things I love, I don't listen to them. That's the kind of responsibility that I have. So
Mm.
it's a curious question, though.
Yeah, it makes me think of my children. If I'm in the supermarket with them and they're like rolling around on the floor, going crazy, like I'm not responsible for that starting because I'm not my child. I didn't choose to roll around on the floor, but
Mm.
I'm responsible for like what I do with them and how I support them and how I
Yeah,
deal with that versus just walking off and just letting them roll around and then letting
yeah,
them deal with it on their own. It's my responsibility, but I didn't choose to do that in the first place. And I think that
yeah.
there is a fine line here where some people end up they blame themselves for having negative thoughts or anxiety producing thoughts and feel like that means that they can't be confident or that means that they can't be happy,
Mm.
but they're taking the responsibility for something that's happened automatically versus that really important part which you're pointing towards, which is what's your relationship with that and
Mm.
how can you navigate that in a way that leaves you feeling how you want to feel.
Yeah, and what I like about your metaphor with the kids, like, yeah, rolling around in the supermarket, is they're just kids and there's an innocence behind that. And our thoughts are innocent too. Like, I might have a thought that I really don't want to have. We call them intrusive thoughts. And there's a complete innocence behind that. Like, if I have a thought that is like scary to me or even just downright bad or wrong, like, there's an innocence behind that. I don't need to analyze it and think, well, why did I have that thought? Why are the kids rolling around? Because they're just kids. Like, why am I thinking that? It's just a thought. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
innocent.
And so that meaning is the part that we are constructing, and that's the part to understand. So,
So maybe that's where we have responsibility over the meaning that we're adding to it.
because that's what I would contest is the thing that we can control. We
Mm,
can't
yeah.
control the thoughts that pop into our head. We can choose what we pay attention to. We can
Mm,
control what we choose to think in the moment, although that's
mm,
always going to change. But we can have a huge level of control over our perspective
mm,
and over the meanings that we choose to make.
mm.
Um, how helpful or important has your psychology background been in your role of being a coach now that you're in the transformational space?
Yeah, it's a good question. In a way, I don't really know because, and I'll tell you why I say that is like, if I'd have come across coaching first, say before psychology, I don't know how helpful that would have been for me. I don't know if the stuff would have landed like it landed. For me, my psychology background gave me that scientific underpinning, that scientific grounding to know, well, literally the study of human psychology. And then for me, it felt like that was the bedrock. And all the stuff I've learned from coaching, which is sometimes scientific, but also a bit spiritual sometimes, really slots into everything I already know. And so what will happen is I've got all these psychological theories like confirmation bias and autobiographical memory processing and self-fulfilling prophecy. And usually what happens is I'll learn something in the coaching world and it will slot into something that I've already learned in psychology. And there are some things I'm learning in coaching don't slot into what I already know. So I kind of create a new slot for it. So I don't know. I do draw on some of what I've learned in cognitive behavioral therapy sometimes. Um, and I do draw on a bit of psychological theory sometimes. I'm in the process of writing my first book. And what I'm finding in writing it, and it's early days, but I'm finding that I am naturally blending the science of psychology along with what I call the art of transformation. And in my book, I'll share something that I've found helpful and that I know is helpful for my clients. And I'm finding that I'm just naturally saying, well, this is the science behind it. Like, this is how we work. And as a coaching level, the applications of this, the implications of this are this, and this. So I'm finding that it works really well. Like, nothing I've learned in coaching is too woo-woo or fluffy. Like, it all just makes sense. It reminds me of when I learned mindfulness, and mindfulness came from Buddhism. It just did, and Buddhism is like 2,500 years old, and most of what we're catching up with in Western society was known 2000, 2500 years ago. We're just now explaining it with the science. So in that way, I think we're playing catch up.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much that's still very basic and simple, yet it's the most effective. And we try and do lots of fancy ways to make it better, but
Yeah.
often, the
Yeah.
simplicity speaks for itself. It sounds like that you really, where you've got the art of transformation, it's not necessary to have that psychology, but
Mm.
you can make it helpful if you make it helpful. And I'm sure
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people have different backgrounds or understandings that are then helpful in their own way when they're using that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, for me, it's funny because I would say that most of the clients that hire me because they've said because I've got a psychology background. Like they like that. I think that makes them feel
Yeah.
safe and secure, which makes sense. I mean, the book I'm writing, I think it's going to get more and more spiritual the more it goes on. It starts off scientific and it gets more and more spiritual. But I think that we have a spiritual element to us. Like I wonder sometimes when one of the most popular films is Star Wars, and even if people haven't seen it, like they've heard of the Force, and the Force has like a magical quality about it. Like we all want the Force, and the Force is basically just a metaphor for the aliveness that pervades all of life. Like there is just life. There is just life. And there is a magic to it that we sometimes feel. And so when I talk about being spiritual, all I mean is like just being in touch with that aliveness, the thing that is making you breathe right now. That is life. And so I think actually we all want some level of spirituality, some level of just being in touch with the magic of being alive. Kids naturally have it. Most of the time, my kids wake up and they're happy most of the time, and they're just so quick to joy because there's something natural about that state of ease and aliveness and joy and excitement and fun and inspiration. And I think we
Mm.
just get conditioned out of that natural state, and I think we just want to return back to that. I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of it comes from this sense of a need for control. And that's where we talk about, you've got science of psychology. It tells us how we behave the way we do, what we do, why we do it. And then transformation's about an art form. It's an unfolding and it's exciting. And there's a letting go of that. Spirituality for me, the more I'm getting into coaching and helping people, the more spiritual, I guess, I'm unfolding and allowing that to come into the work that I'm doing because I'm seeing how much more freedom it gives for people to not be stuck into having to try and control things and do things a certain way. They can start to find out their own way of doing things, which is more effective. And part of that is, connecting to our own inner wisdom, to the inspiration, the intuition that we have. And I know you've studied a lot of the three principles. Could you tell us about what the universal mind is
Mm,
and how you interact with that in your own life
mm.
and how we tap into that and what it is and how it can help people?
Yeah, fantastic. So the three principles is a way of understanding the human psychological experience. So there was one of these guys that had a spontaneous enlightenment. You might, a lot of people heard of Eckhart Tolle. He had a spontaneous enlightenment, and he has a particular way of explaining how he then thinks life works. Byron Katie, she did too, and then a guy called Sydney Banks, he had a spontaneous enlightenment. Enlightenment for me is lots of things. It's not just floating on a cloud of bliss. It's understanding how the game of life works. The way I think about this, right, is I recently went to play a new board game with my family. Before we just jumped into playing it, we took 15 minutes to read the instructions to understand how the game worked. And those of us that understood the instructions well played the game really well. Those of us, like my dad, who didn't understand the instructions, didn't do so well at the game. And I think of life as a game. Like if I'm going to do well in life, I want to understand the instructions. And the three principles is a way of understanding the instructions. So it's three principles that basically explain all of our human experience. And one of the principles is universal mind. One of the principles is consciousness. And one of the principles is thought. So universal mind is basically life. If you were to picture the universe expanding, like we are in that universe, and there is a natural flow of it, like it's just doing its thing. That is universal mind. There is it's like there's a flow in place. There's something in place that has the universe do its thing. When you look at something that is growing, like in within that DNA, there is something really intelligent. I mean, you look at DNA or chromosomes or anything like that. You look at a snowflake. That it's incredibly magic. My heart is beating right now. I am breathing. I'm not choosing to do it. It's just doing it. There is a magic behind life, an intelligence behind life. There is just life itself. And that's what we refer to as universal mind in the three principles. It's kind of like the answer to why. Like, if I was to say, why is your heart beating? If you might be able to give me a scientific explanation, like it's the electromagnetic current that's doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, but why? And then you could maybe even answer that. There would become a point where you can't answer why anymore. That's universal mind. The fact that there just is life. That's the magic. And we tap into that when we get quiet with our thinking and when we create space. I don't know if your listeners have ever had the experience where you've known something and you didn't know that you know it, or you were surprised that you knew it, or you knew to do something. One of the
What would
ways
be, yeah, what would be an example of that for you?
um, I was coaching someone recently and I came up with some stuff that I didn't know that I knew. Or my little girl was going to fall off something, and kind of like Spider-Man, I just reached and grabbed her like that. I didn't even know that I knew that she was falling. It's like that instinct, but it's beyond instinct. It's like that when you're in touch with it, you are in the flow of life. I mean, when you're in flow state, there's a science behind flow state, but you don't even need the science. When you get out of your own way and you get out of your ego, there is just a flow to life, and it's beautiful. All athletes know what it is. I would say that everyone knows what it is. You have a glimpse of it at times where you're just flowing. It's like the you that you think you are is less concrete and fixed, and you're in some sort of wonderful state where your awareness and the thing that you're involved in are just complete. So that's universal life. It has a real feeling to it. And then we have consciousness, which is like a blank screen. And then we have thought. And basically the way that we work is we project our thought onto consciousness, which is a blank screen, and experience that thought being reflected back to us, kind of like a projection. Again, psychology, when I studied projection at least points to the fact that sometimes we have something within us that we project onto others. Everything we experience is our thinking being reflected back to us. Everything. That's just how the human system works. Like, that's both science and it's spirituality. Like, that's just how we work. So the three principles for me was the missing piece of the jigsaw that helped me understand the game of life and how we work and how the human psychology works. We think that we're seeing life as it is, but we're not. We're seeing our thinking.
So that's really it's just a complete understanding of how we operate, how we work. And by the deeper you get into that understanding, the better your relationship's going to be with yourself, because you're going to understand how you work versus trying to play. I really like the metaphor of playing the game without reading the instructions. It's going to be difficult and frustrating, and it's not going to be as fun. But once you have that grounding, that understanding, you can play more. It's a lot more enjoyable.
And it's not just like it's a better relationship with yourself, it's a better relationship with others, but it's a better relationship to results. Like, if I know how to play the game, I've got more chance of winning than someone that doesn't know how to play. Like, a lot of the time we wonder why we're not creating certain results in our life and having external success. The three principles really helps with that, because then you know how to play the game, you know how to create results more, you know how to get more inspired, get more creative, and make shit happen, basically.
Yeah, it makes me think. We just went to Athens on the weekend, and I remember one of my clients I'd been on a coaching call with him, and he was in Athens, and he was telling me about how great it was. This was ages ago, and then I messaged him before and said, "Oh, you've been? Have you got any tips?" And he said, "Oh, actually, I've written a whole guide. I'll send it across to you." And I was like, "Amazing!" So he sent it across, and I read through, and he's put where to go to eat and get the metro, and this is how much it costs, and this are the options, and these are the things you need to see. And I took the main points that looked fun for me, and then made a bit of a plan, and then we got there, and it just allowed us to just go and see the things that we wanted to see.
Mm.
We didn't have everything planned out, but we had a few key things, and then we filled in the gaps in between that, and it made it more fun versus just getting there and then thinking, well, what am I going to do? Where are we going to go? Not knowing anything about it
Mm.
or anything about the place, we would have just been lost.
Mm.
And sometimes it's fun to figure things out, and sometimes it's fun to have a little bit of an understanding of the territory first to know where you want to go and how you want to navigate it.
Yeah.
How do you connect to that infinite intelligence? Is it something that's always there and you need to get out of the way? Or is there in terms of mindfulness, we can connect to our true essence by getting the thoughts either out of the way, or we're just observing the thoughts and then things get a little bit more clear? Is it similar to mindfulness or is it different?
Yeah, it's kind of like what you said. It's always there, and we need to get out of the way. But the way I would look at this now is I would often start off a mindfulness course with a question for students. How much time do you spend in the present moment? And then they would all rate it. And no one ever said 100%, but also no one ever said 1%. There was somewhere in between. And after I'd been doing that a couple of months, I realized that actually we were missing a trick here. And then I turned it into something slightly different. And I would ask the same question, how much time do you spend in the present moment? And then I might say to them, that's actually a trick question. Why is it a trick question? And most of the time, no one would get it until I pointed out that actually you always are in the present moment. And then things started to click a little bit more for me and my students. And it's like that. Like we're always connected to life. Like we are life. Like I think it's Eckhart Tolle that says you don't have a life, you are life. Like we are always connected to intelligence. Like we just are. But we don't know that we are. It's not something that we need to go looking for. It's kind of like I had like a proper spiritual experience where I basically felt enlightened for about 2 to 3 months, and I was walking around and I was in an almost constant state of, not when I say peace, it wasn't like a boring peace. It was like an aliveness and excitement and energy, almost verging on bliss. And I was completely in touch with my wisdom, and I was coaching people, and it felt like I had the answer to everything. And that experience started fading, and I was trying to get back to that experience. And I kept on reading these spiritual texts that say, if you stop trying to get back to it, then you'll get there. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Like I didn't get it. And what I see now is that we are it. We are that. We always are there. We always are connected, but we make so much noise with our thinking that we can't see that we are. And if we were to just slow down and take some space and see that we have an us that is natural, that is perfect, whole and complete, then we'd find the secret to what we've been looking for. Like it's what it's like for me is like, and I'm having this more and more and more, the more I learn for myself, is I'm spending more and more time in my natural state. And it's a flow state. There's a peace, there's an aliveness, there's a contentment, there's a fulfillment, there's creativity and inspiration. Like it's not a boring place to be. It's a great place to be. It's how I want to feel all the time. And when I'm out of it, it's really funny to me that when I'm out of it and I'm not in it, I doubt that I was ever in there. And I think, well, did I make it up? I'm sure I have memories of feeling great and feeling wonderful and feeling like I don't want for anything. And I start to like solidify this idea that I made it up and that it was a dream. And then eventually, if I forget to do that, I seem to drift back into that state. And the less I think about me, the less anxious I am, the less worried I am, the more time I seem to spend in that beautiful state. In fact, there's a book actually, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's a couple of Buddhist monks that talk about how you're either in a beautiful state or you're in a state of suffering. And it's that black and white. And I think of that as we're either in, that natural flow, that natural state, which again, young kids are, and we are when we get out of the way, or we're in our ego state where we are so preoccupied with our thoughts about ourselves and what we need to do and what we have to do and what we must do and what we should do to kind of survive, that we're in like a box and we think ourselves out of that natural state.
Mm. Yeah.
The
That
Four
that
Sacred Secrets, that's what the book's called.
What's it called?
The Four Sacred Secrets.
Four Sacred Secrets. Um, that's the thing people often try to run away from is their own thoughts. I
Mm,
remember this for myself, that to be in a room on my own with my own thoughts was just torture. It was awful. And then getting into meditation and mindfulness over the years, I then started to know that, you could put me in a room for 2 hours and I'd be fine,
mm,
because I would just observe the thoughts rather than being lost in them and trying to run away from them. And the deeper that we look, the more we see the things we're trying to run away from aren't what's going on around us, but it's our experience of what's going on around us, and our thinking about that.
mm,
Um, how does this relate to the challenges of life?
mm,
So, someone has a challenge, they have many challenges in front of them. Maybe it's a relationship that's not working, or a business that's not working, or they're not starting.
mm,
How does this relate to that? Whether that's tapping into their innate intelligence, whether it's
mm,
finding enlightenment in that journey.
mm.
What does that look like, and from
Yeah.
your lens?
For me, it's like, have you ever noticed that sometimes challenges seem impossible and sometimes they look like interesting projects? Sometimes, like, the things on the outside world don't change, but what's changed is our inner state. So, the way I think about this, in answer to your question, is it's kind of like we're up and down this ladder, this internal ladder, all the time. We've got, when we're at the top, we're in our highest self, our natural self. And in that state, we have clarity, we have creativity, we have motivation and energy and inspiration. And challenges can just look like goals, they can look like opportunities, they can look like possibilities. But when we're further down the ladder, challenges can look like impossible tasks and problems to be solved. It's like, I know a couple of people that have rowed the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I don't want to do that, but to them, presumably that looked like a fun challenge, or at least they thought they'd get something out of it, right? Like,
Mm.
they're thinking about it completely differently to how I'm thinking about it. Like, if I had to do that, I'd think about that as a pretty big problem. So they're looking at it differently. So the problem isn't out there, the challenge isn't out there, it's in our internal state. So when you see that, actually, what I would do for me these days is I would look at where I am on the ladder. Like, if I wake up and I'm thinking that life looks harder than it did yesterday to me today, then that's a signal to me that life hasn't changed, that my internal state has changed. Like, literally, sometimes life looks darker, looks harder to me, and I'm like, okay, that's a signal that I'm further down the ladder than I would like to be. So what I would do these days is I would stop looking outside for the solution, because it's not in that, it's in me. The creativity that I need to solve that challenge, it's in me. The inspiration that I need is in me. Or at least I need to think about what the next step is, so that I can find out the answer to how I'm going to solve this challenge. So I would then look at raising my inner state so that I'm much more likely to have the idea that I need that's going to help me get to where I want to go. And I would do what I need to do. And that might be to ask someone for some help, but it also might be just to take a break and go to the gym, or go for a walk, or speak to a friend, or have something nice for dinner. Sometimes I get my best ideas, actually, almost all the time, I get my best ideas in the shower or driving somewhere, when I'm not even thinking about the thing. And again, the science behind that is we have a neural network, and there's something called the default mode network. Now, I'm a bit rusty on this, so I can't remember when it goes online or offline, but either way, when we're not trying to solve a problem, our creativity actually goes online. And it's something to do with the default mode network. And I can't remember if it goes on or off because I'm rusty. But
Mm.
essentially, when we're not thinking about a challenge, we come up with the answer that we were looking for. And when we're so focused on it, I think it's that it goes offline. That's right, it goes offline. And we just get into a reactive state. So you're much more likely to solve a challenge when you're higher up the ladder, when you've got access to that creativity, and more ideas will come to you. So again, it's an inner game, it's not an outer game.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting how it's like a letting go. When you let go and you stop
Yeah.
trying to force it, the space opens up, and then you allow that
Mm.
creativity to come through, or you can think more clearly. Versus when you're really trying to force it and you're lost in the thought at that point, then you can't really solve anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, can you tell us more about the book that you're writing at the moment and what's going to be in there?
Oh yeah. Well, it's called Mindset is Everything, and it's very much an inside out approach to life. So rather than focusing on how to change things on the outside, which is just a way of trying to control things that you can't control, it's about mastering your mindset. Because as you know, being the perception coach, it's all about perception. And it's a blend of, the science of psychology and the art of transformation. It's basically the things that I've found most helpful for me and my clients over my career. I've been in this game since I started my degree in psychology for 18 years now. So I've learned a lot. I mean, I've studied everything I could get my hands on, from personal development to human performance and spirituality and the science of psychology. And it's the book that I would have wanted to read. The more I write it, the more excited I am. I really think it's going to transform lives. And I think it's a perfect blend of some sort of, factual scientific stuff and some other things that are human principles that explain how we work, that are beyond psychology, basically. But I think it's going to be a way of getting transformation accessible to everyone. Because I mean, the book's like a tenner. Not everyone can afford to work one
Mm.
on one with a coach or even come to a
Mm.
group coaching program. But for £10, I think it's going to be the book that can really just help people break free of what I call our mind-made prisons and
Mhm.
see thought for what it really is, and just help them live a nicer life, basically. So it's early days in writing it, but it's flowing really quickly and really well. And the more I write, the more excited I am about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know enough about you and what you're up to and what you can do to know that it's going to be a really impactful book, and I'm excited for you to finish it so I can read it. Um,
Fantastic.
and I love the name as well. Mindset is everything. It really is. It starts to point us towards the fact that we need to look inside rather than outside to get the answers that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I've got one final question for you, and then we'll finish up here. What advice would you give your 12-year-old self if you could go back and impart
Mm.
one piece of wisdom from your current day self?
Mm. Do you know what's really funny? Do you know what I generally think is whatever advice I would go back and give myself, I'm not sure I'd listen to myself. Even though I know it's the future me, I'm not sure I'd listen. 12 years old. So I would say, I'd want to say trust your inner knowing. And I'd have to explain what that is, but actually maybe I wouldn't, because I think my inner knowing would know. I would say
It,
to myself, there's a
it,
part of you that knows the answer to these questions that you're asking. There's a part of you that just knows, and it comes before thought. You just know. Trust yourself.
if
Either you
you
want something or you don't, and you sometimes think yourself out of it. Just follow your wanting, follow your knowing.
so don't overthink it, don't overanalyze it, not thinking about what you should do, but trusting that you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of brings us back to the beginning of this conversation when you were talking about how you stopped doing things you should do and you let go of all those rules that you had about how you should live and how things should be.
I love that you've seen
And
that link. Yeah,
and
yeah.
then life started to open up for you. And ever since I've known you, it's one of the things I love about you is you have a real excitement for life. You know,
Mm,
you're an excitement for life, a passion for life, but also a massive passion for what you do as well. And the fact that you can give that to other people and help them have that excitement for themselves.
mm.
Um, I'm sensing that that's a key part of it. So yeah, thanks for sharing that
Great question. Thank you.
piece of gold. We've got our own podcast, the
Yeah.
Smashing It podcast. So anyone that hasn't checked that out, there's a few key episodes there. My favorite one is on commitment, I'm always sending that one to people because it can have profound impacts in their lives if they're open to it. So people can check out our joint podcast, Smashing It. Where can people find you, and how can people work with you? What does that all look like?
Yeah, great. So my website is chris-finn.com. If you just type Chris Finn Coaching into Google, I come up number one. I work one-on-one with people, and I also run events as well. So my next group coaching event is in September in Dorset in the UK, and that's a 3-day transformational journey where people come in often in a reactive state. We get them out of that reactive state and into that creative state where they can just access their full potential, and they leave that event transformed, ready to go off and create that life that they love from a place of love and inspiration. So they're already there and they're going to create from that place. So I'm also on Instagram as the Transformative Coach, so people can follow me there.
Fantastic. Yeah, highly recommend it. And I know there's going to be a lot of gold in your event, and maybe even some special guest people coming as well. So,
exactly, a special guest. Yeah. Hint,
yeah.
hint.
Special guest. Who could that be? But all I can say is it'll be somebody pretty powerful. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, got a lot from it. I hope everybody that's joined us for this has got a lot from it as well. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everybody for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.